Absolute Superman issue 6, Jason Aaron writing with Carmine Di Giandomenico on the R, which
Mm-hmm.
somehow that never clicked for me. I guess I just wasn't thinking
Nope.
about the art. I was just sort of reading the book, didn't even think about who the artist usually is. And then afterwards, when I was making up the list, went, oh, it's G Domenico. And then I went back and looked at the art and went, oh, I can see it now that I'm thinking about it.
Yep. So when I was reading it, I was like, well, this is clearly not Sandoval, but it's a bit close enough. I had no clue that it was Giandomenico until I got to the end. And then, like you just said, when you go back and look, you're like, oh yeah, I know that is Giandomenico. But it doesn't have kind of the hallmark, maybe the super speed sequence, right? But it didn't have a lot of the stuff that I associate with Giandomenico's art. You know, a lot of kind of the over the top actiony pieces. It's almost kind of more of a quiet version here.
It's reined in a little bit because I can usually tell B's faces really easily here. I can see it when I'm looking for it, but it's very. I don't know if just maybe the inks and the colorist have really done a lot of work to try and make it feel as close to like the previous art as possible. But anyway, this book starts with Clark or Cal in the ship and emphasizes this time of like he's kind of awake and aware of the journey, right? So he's got Saul talking to him and scanning planets as they fly by. They don't have like a specific destination in mind. They're just looking for an inhabitable world, right? That's all it is.
Yep.
And Cal's losing hope, and he's like, just throw me out of the ship. Let me die. I don't want to do this anymore. I've lost hope. And just at that moment, he starts to feel really weird because he's starting to feel really hot, and it's because they're next to a yellow sun. So of course, very quickly, Saul's like, hey, I found a planet. There's one right here that might be good for you.
I love the scanning, success, life-sustaining world detected. And then it's the, ship heading into the Earth's atmosphere.
Yep. And obviously it breaks up as he's entering. So basically, like when we cut to Jonathan and Martha, and they're in the field, and they're talking about how times are rough. I mean, basically what we get through this issue is we discover that Lazarus have got drones that are controlling the weather above their farm so it never rains to try and basically force them out because they want the land. It's a super evil ship.
Very, very, it's very similar to what was going on in Krypton, right?
Oh yeah.
With you didn't pay for the rain, and again, I was getting just definitely echoes of his parents in Pa and we don't know if they're Ma and Pa quite yet, but Jonathan and Martha here, Also, Jay Domenico's Jonathan Kent kind of looks like Paul Newman here, and that cracked me up a little bit.
I mean, I don't know if that's intentional, but I mean, maybe it is.
No.
But yeah, so Superman lands and he's on fire. He's freaking out, and they kind of acknowledge that he's speaking a different language to them, so they can't understand him. But he collapses, and Martha's the sympathetic one who's like, "Hey, he needs help. He didn't mean to do anything. He's clearly scared." And we get like a montage of him lying in a bed, and he's like powers keep kicking in and scaring the crap out of them, where he'll float above the bed, or his super strength will kick in and break the bed apart, or his heat vision turns on and starts ripping around the room. And it's only after he wakes up, like sometime later, where he kind of darts out of the room. He kind of sees how pretty like the sunrise is, and he looks around at the field, and he sees he sees pretty land. He's seen farmland. And he's like, okay, this feels like home, bizarrely, right? Because that's something that Jonathan says later, is that even when he couldn't understand him, he could sort of tell that Clark was a farm boy. Like there was something there about that already. So even though they can't communicate, he spends weeks with him, just like helping, like picking up the tractor, helping around the house. And both Martha and Jonathan kind of like form a bit of a bond and kind of tell them how they think he's affected their partner. Like, Jonathan talks about how, Martha was always upset about not having kids, and you've kind of given her this thing that she was missing, and she's telling, and again, Clark can't understand any of this, right? Like, Superman can't understand the lick of what they're saying. So there's kind of this sweet, like, we can't really communicate anything, but we're still working in sync and forming a bond anyway, which kind of makes it sweet in a different way than normal.
Because they have more in common than they don't, right? Like there's this, he can tell that he's a farmer's kid, and that, Cal is very familiar with the type of stuff that they do on the farm. And and that whole part with, you know, she always wanted to be a mother, and you being around is letting her do that, you know. And then when she says, you know, him being around has given Jonathan something else to worry about, you know, to help him remember who he is. And it's not just worrying about that the farm's not going to survive.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's like he showed up almost like an angel falling from the skies. Because even when he lands and that the cape's up behind him, it kind of resembles wings, right? And we get this real fun moment where Jonathan's like, I asked for it to rain, not no boy, you know, on fire from the sky. So it's this thing that they look like a negative, but has turned into a positive.
Yeah, and eventually Saul comes back online. Basically, Saul had to shut down for like all these weeks, and eventually comes back online after recharging. And Cal's like, "Okay, can you please download the language that these people speak so that I can learn it? Thank you." So yeah, they're quite shocked when he just walks up and says, "Hello, my name is Kal-El." And they're like, "Oh, well, this is Jonathan." I feel like they would still say they're Jonathan and Martha, even when they couldn't like understand each other. I think at the very least you would point to yourself and go, Peter, who are you? But anyway,
Matt.
Yes, good job, Matt. You got it right. So yeah, very quickly, like Saul recognizes that there's drones in the sky, like affecting the weather, and like brings them all down. And immediately it starts raining, and it's not enough to save the season on the farm, but it's like, hey, this is like a sign of like hope to come. Like he's already fixed something.
Yeah.
But there's like there's a spy from Lazarus watching in a truck saying, hey, we need immigration over here. There's like someone suspicious here that can do things. So the Peacemakers show up and basically try and take Cal from them, and they're yelling, leave him alone, and Superman gets angry, and obviously he ends up being stronger than they're expecting, and basically Jonathan like looks at Clark and says, hey son, please go, you know, like get away, don't worry about us. And he flies off kind of in anger, frustrated, and Lazarus are freaking out saying, oh wait, this kid just took to the skies, he's flying. So that's actually the end of the flashback stuff for the issue. And when we start on the present day stuff, Lois is went to the old folks home where Martha's apparently staying, just sort of teasing that she's maybe going to go speak to her next issue. But we get a sequence at the end here where Brainiac's talking and discussing plans with whoever's working for Brainiac, or at least is in cahoots with Brainiac. And they even say Lazarus Pit, you know, deactivating, and I'm like, okay, it makes sense. Lazarus Corporation, Lazarus Pits, that's not a much of a stretch. But I was like, who's using it, right? Because as much as it's an obvious person that could be using it, I was thinking, well, it's probably someone else because this is a Superman comic. Nope, it's Ra's al Ghul. Ra's al Ghul is running the Lazarus Corporation, which you know we could have predicted, obviously, but it's this is it now. So the Absolute Universe is turning Ra's al Ghul into a Superman villain.
Which, if you look at what this version of Superman is, right? He is that hero of the oppressed, right? We've seen him saving the miners. We've seen that what the S symbol stands for, right? It's the working class. And when you look at Ra's al Ghul and what he represents, he's, you know, yes, ultimately he wants to save the world, but he wants to do it for himself, right? So he's kind of like this upper, you know, the super upper class that wants to save it, but only so they can exploit it. So you put those two at odds with each other, and it makes for some great storytelling because they're on the different ends of the spectrum. But early on, when Jonathan and Martha are talking, we get little hints of it here. And as I'm reading, you know, Jonathan's like, you know, Lazarus, you know, I've been listening to the, you know, or reading on the internet, and there's people on the line that said like they have these pits that can heal anything. And I'm like, we're not doing Ra's al Ghul. And then we get to the end, and he gets out of the Lazarus pit, and you know, full bearded glory wearing a loincloth. And I'm just like, oh, we are doing Ra's al Ghul. Awesome. Yeah, let's see where this goes.
It opens a lot of interesting questions because, one, like, where, how, and when does Lex ever become like a thing in this, if at all? And is Lex even a Superman villain in this universe? Lex could be a Batman villain in this universe for all we goddamn know, given this.
He could be an ally, right? Because
Could be an ally.
if we take the idea that Lex, right, that Lex could have saved the world, but they got jealous of Superman. If Superman doesn't appear as we think he does, right? Maybe Lex has more time to reflect or whatever, you know? Or maybe he's a Lazarus scientist that defects because he doesn't like the way that it's going, kind of like Lois.
Maybe he takes control of the company after Superman takes out Raz. I mean, that's maybe the most obvious, boring thing for them to do, but it's possible.
Right.
But yeah, but it also opens up the door of like, okay, well, who else could like swap villain or swap heroes? Like, what if I don't know, Sinestro is now a Teen Titans villain? I don't know.
Or I mean, you got Sinestro and Martian Manhunter, right? They're both these alien figures that But yeah, it definitely opens the door and it switches stuff up in the world. But I do like the pairing of Superman, especially this version of Superman, and Ra's al Ghul, because this clearly doesn't feel like the same Ra's al Ghul that we're used to. Because everything, like when I think of a Lazarus pit, it's in a cave, it's deep and dank. It's all ritualistic. Here, it seems like it's much more tech based.
Yes,
he gets out of the Lazarus pit, and
he does have robots that are wearing robes, like they're in a cult. So there is at least a little bit of that ritualistic side of it still remaining.
But it's more like that techno. Like I just listened to this series about a techno AI cult that really went off the rails. And this is kind of what they used to wear black robes and call themselves actual Siths, right? Like some weird stuff out there. This is what it reminded me. Like I finished that podcast, I read this book, I was like, oh, it's right here, But yeah, no, these robots that almost kind of also resemble the Superman robots that I'm used to seeing. The kind of faceless, almost like Helix. But they're wearing robes here, and yeah, it definitely switches up Ra's as far as we know. So, but yeah, I'm super, super hyped. This took the Absolute Superman, which I was already enjoying, and it really tugged on my heartstrings with Ma and Pa Kent and their conversation at the beginning, and then when they are both talking to Clark, even though he can't understand, and it's like, you being here kind of saved the other, and yeah, it really pulled on me here. So it took me from really enjoying Absolute Superman to absolutely loving after this first arc.
Yeah, I mean, this is technically the end of the first arc in some ways. I mean, again, much like Absolute Batman, does not feel like really the end of any kind of story, but just like, hey, big cliffhanger to end this arc on before we go into the rest of it. So, meaning that when they sell the trade, assuming tariffs don't make that impossible, there'll be a nice cliffhanger at the end of it for people to chew on. So, all right, what are you giving Absolute Superman?
I'm gonna give this one a 9.
Damn. I don't know if I'll go quite that. I did like it, and I do think the Ra's al Ghul reveal at the end is interesting. But I think I'm happy to go for an 8 out of 10 on this, for sure.